So it's always awesome to hear a fellow South African voice and see a fellow South African back from home, right? You have a tremendous background. In my leadership podcast, I always love to start off with the early days. The very first job, some of the key highlights, lessons, principles that you would have learned along the way that transitioned you into the impactful leader that you are today. So maybe if you could share a little bit about that as we kick off the conversation.
Okay, so absolutely. So I think my leadership journey probably started the moment I was born. So my mom and dad always say I walked out with a plan, probably a calculator and a pencil in both hands, right? Through school, I think I have such a massive heart. I've always been the supporter of the underdog. Completely honesty and transparency and fairness is so critical to me that I stepped up wherever there was a need for somebody to step up and defend. One of the earliest things that I think I did as a leader, well, you're in high school, you don't know the concept of leader, right? You kind of just go with the flow. Was that we had kids at our school that couldn't afford lunch. And what I started was a feeding program. So literally after school, I'd go to all of the businesses, and my mom worked at the bank. So, she would generally direct me to the businesses, and I would ask for donations. So sometimes, people would give me whatever cash they had, or sometimes they'd volunteer to do a meal. And then a period before lunch break, I would actually get myself and one or two girls, and we'd go away and make sandwiches. If we had whatever we had is whatever we made. So it could be peanut butter sandwiches or whatever it was. And then we would deliver it to kids before the break started. So that kids never felt that, you show up at lunch break, everybody's got a lunch and you're standing in the feeding queue. So, all kids that didn't have lunch, would secretly get their sandwiches way before the lunch break. And I think the humble thought of it is what exploded. And thereafter, every day we had a sponsor for lunch. So I think for me, that's kind of where my leadership journey started. It started through high school, through university, very, very impactful from the family I grew up in, and from the values that they instilled in me. And just from the way we ran our home life, right? So thereafter, I got into university, decided to be a finance, decided to follow the route of a CA. At that stage, my entire family thought I was going to be a glorified bookkeeper. So I got accepted for medicine, got accepted for engineering, and I chose to do finance. And the concept of a chartered accountant was not known. So coming from an Indian family, you would know this. We all doctors, engineers, or lawyers. So when I announced to my family I was going to be an accountant, they asked me if I was going to go be a bookkeeper. Okay. My very first job was at Sasol. I decided to do training outside of public practice. So I did top articles, as we know in South Africa. And I think I just continued there. Within my first year, I was elected to represent all of the trainee accountants on the SICA membership board, as well as at Sasol, just because the program was so new. SICA was very nervous around having a top program and how that would roll out. A lot of finance graduates were not entering the top program because they were afraid that their CA qualification will not hold weight if they didn't have the big four articles behind them. So I sat on all of those boards representing the trainees, giving our view, how should the program be changed from a Sasol perspective. So it kind of leading has just been natural to me, and over the years I've kind of harnessed what my style is. As opposed to very early in life, just going with the flow and what felt right.
That's an incredible story, and I appreciate you sharing that. And of course, I'm humbled by your grit, your determination, and your passion for doing the right thing and making an impact to society. And you talked a lot about that story there, just in terms of you soliciting, I guess, investments to feed the underprivileged, and also rounding up troops and a team of people to go and actually make that happen. So there's two important things that I'd like to double click on for a second. I'm sure you've had to deal with rejection when soliciting some of those investments to go and fund those initiatives. And also, I'm sure there must have been an exercise with rounding people up together to get them to believe in what you're trying to do. And I would imagine probably doing it at no cost as well, right? So can you talk to me a little bit about the rejection piece of it, like how were you able to deal with that, and then also the teamwork piece of it in terms of how you rallied up the troops together to go and make that happen.
And at the very young age of 13. So I think so I'm quite a determined person, and I am very stubborn when I set my mind to something and I really believe it's filled with good intentions. So I approached it in a few ways. One is, having insight to my mum being the branch manager at FMB Aquas. Obviously, she knew who the potential businessmen were. And then, so that was one lever. I think the other lever was just sitting down and having a conversation. I really believe in the power of conversation. If we honestly put what we want on the table, the only answer we could get is no. And what is no? You ask again. So really it was that. It was, so going after school, going to businesses, saying, I have an idea, also coming from a community. I think that I mustn't underplay that, because it hasn't been all me, right? It's been a community that's been willing to provide for each other and take care of each other. So in a way, you're selling the heart. So, there's so many children that just don't have the funds to get a sandwich at school or have one meal a day. And, you sit down and you say, you're having your lunch and there's kids around you that don't have it. And, a lot of us are very proud to ask. And that was really the conversation that I remember having. It was, we have children at school, they don't have lunch. I'm not asking you to sponsor an entire meal. I'm not asking you to cook the meal either. So all I'm asking you is to just give me a donation of whatever you can give me. But I mean, at that stage, 20 years ago, well, actually more, 30 years ago, 10 rands was a lot of money. And then you collect all of the 10 rands. And then at the end of the day, I'd see, okay, well, I have 50 rands. It means I can get 5 loaves of bread and 2 tins of jam. Okay, and then I can make X amount of sandwiches. And it used to be my 2 friends. And from a school perspective, the principal was very happy to give me the period off, because, I would catch up my work. So it was never a stance of, okay, now you're running this program and you're out of class. So I was always the child that was 1 year ahead of everybody else. So he was very happy to give me the period, and it would be like my 2 best friends, and let's go have a chat somewhere and make some sandwiches. We get a free period, and let's go deliver the sandwiches, right? And I think when you give it with a grateful heart, I think people appreciate the gift as such. And yes, lots of rejection. People are going to say no, and you just keep asking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like you almost proactively eliminated rejection by just that human connection. And as you labeled it, the power of conversation, right? Just in terms of really highlighting the benefit, the value to the people that you're engaging with in terms of executing on a greater cause, on a greater vision. I want to jump into your career a little bit, right? Because you've had some tremendous roles during your tenure. You've been responsible for large organizations, large businesses across some really key logos and key companies across the region that you're in. Did you have to establish a platform or set yourself apart to be recognized or put in a position to be selected for some of those roles?
I think absolutely. I think, when you start your schooling life, you start your brand. And as you go through school and through university and through life, you build your brand. And I think being very determined on who I want to be, as well as what I want to be, and I think finding the balance between the two, gave me probably an unconscious strategy on how I was going to set myself apart, because you need to know your strengths and you need to know your development areas equally, and you need to know how you need to set yourself apart. So if you don't know what sets yourself apart, it's very difficult to go about it. So I remember the first conscious decision that I made was doing my master's, because you're going to have many CAs, and you're going to have many CAs that graduate, and then you're going to have CAs that come through the big 4 article firms, and then you're going to have top CAs, etc., etc. So one very conscious decision I made was doing my master's degree in finance straight after, with the intention of completing a PhD one day, because that already sets yourself apart. The second thing, that I went very intentionally is only accepting number 1. So whether it was at school, at university, whatever I gave it 150%, all that I had, just to make sure that, you know, the marks or the results that society measures you on is behind what you achieve, right? Because it builds credibility. And thereafter, you know, I worked on having the good conversations. So the real genuine honesty about who I am, where I come from, you know, what do I want in life? Where do I see myself going? Why do I do what I do? And that has been, you know, probably the three things that I intentionally done to really stand apart from other candidates or from different roles or wherever my career took me.
That's amazing, right? I feel like there's so much in there just in terms of you just being honest and self-aware in terms of your actual value, your actual skill set, your talent, but then also having a dedicated and aligned plan to where you want to be just in terms of your selection process on the companies and the organizations that you wanted to be a part of, right? So there seems to be a lot of your skill set from a leadership perspective that's kind of organic. Well, I can't believe I used the word organic, like natural, let me say it that way, authentic. And so as a leader, like how do you, because you know all the greatness, you know yourself, you know, you seem to be natural in terms of just in your impact leadership style. How do you foster that to up and coming leaders? Like how do you build that skill set within the organizations that you're in and develop the up and coming leaders?
So I think, Rishen, that's a very good question, right? Because being passionate about yourself, firstly, is infectious. So, and then being vulnerable and having a huge amount of empathy shows leaders how to show up. And then driving accountability shows that you don't need to be either. Because I think what I've noticed through my career and with the leaders that I've developed, and I mentor many newly qualified CAs, or, you know, I tend to like to focus on that financial manager kind of level, where you're a strong, solid operational manager, but you haven't made the jump into leadership as yet. So I really enjoyed those conversations, or grooming at that level as well. And I think what we need to show is one, you got to understand who you are and why do you do what you do, because nobody ever wants to follow a leader that's fake or not authentic or says one thing but does something else, or is going after self-preservation as opposed to social power. You know, nobody ever wants that person that's conflicted all the time. And I find that the biggest challenge that leaders have, or especially young leaders, is this conflict between the heart and the mind, right? So you're incredibly smart and you have so much to do, but you just don't have that EQ on how to do it. And I think on the heart side is that, you know, you want to be kind and you want to be generous, but at the same time, you're so driven by what you want to achieve that you almost, you know, you can't balance the results of what you want to deliver, because you want to deliver. Ultimately, we all want to deliver, right? But at the same time, you know, you want to have the heart that leads. So I think that's where a lot of the struggle comes in, between the heart and the mind. So for me, you know, it's again, what I do with my team is, first of all, let's upfront talk about where you are in your journey, because for me that shows maturity. If you as a leader can say, here's my vulnerabilities, here's what I'm really good at, these are the points that I struggle with, this is the conversations that I need help with, or here's where my conflict arises, I think then you can start the path of true leadership or authentic leadership. You know, you can be a directive leadership, you can go after direct results, you can be driven and motivated, you know, by M&A and activities and all of those wonderful things that come with it. But if you have those wins and you have nobody to celebrate with, then I don't know if it's truly a win or not. You know, you want your team with you, you want your stakeholders with you, and you want them to celebrate more than you. So what I inspire is first, let's talk about who you are, let's be authentic, tell me what's your style, because, you know, me pushing you into a certain way is just going to make you not authentic, right? And then leadership is going to feel uncomfortable, and then, you know, you're kind of not sure what you're doing, and if you have self-doubt, then, you know, your team is going to pick up on it. So it's, for me, it's really understanding the self, and that's the first part of it, because then we talk about what style you are, right? And then we deep dive into the style of leadership that you want to be. So for my conversations, it's that, and I think what's hard is that you know, people have to go deep within themselves and reflect and then hold themselves accountable, which takes a lot more time than actually just going after a result. And leadership needs time. It needs brain space, it needs head space, it needs heart space, it needs courage. And that's where we need to build more on, is kind of the courage conversations and the hard conversations, because you've got really smart people in general.
It's really being able to connect with the people that you represent, but also being able to unlock their definition of success, and also ideally build that element of collaboration, teamwork, and a support structure to reach that element of success together, right? Versus just at the and running the risk of impacting people negatively just by thinking about results and just thinking about the end goal, right? It sounds easy, sounds formulated in a way. I'd love to talk to you about some of your failures along the way, right? Just in terms of taking that approach as a leader. Like, if there was one big failure that you could point out to during your time as leader, what would that be?
So I'm going to change that question and talk to you about the eye-opening moment for me.
Yeah, of course.
The eye-opening moment for me is generally I have more energy than probably a lot of people combined. Okay. You've probably already got that. I can do everything. And this was all through high school, right? I was in feeding programs, SRC, prefect, whatever, head girl, whatever, all of those conversations. So my eye-opening moment was when I started at a business and in a CFO, my first role as a CFO. And I decided that, finance is not working here, right? So I decided we're going to restructure the team, and we're going to have a fit for purpose team, because I think people sometimes, restructure shouldn't be a cost cutting exercise. A restructure should be, what is my strategy? Where do I see ourselves in 3 years? And what is the organizational design that is required to meet that strategy? So for me, that is the definition of restructure. So I decided that, the finance structure does not fit where we want to be as a strategic organization, and we need to reorganize. And at that stage, the concept of business partnership, FP&A, having more business analysts and less business advisors and less accountants was kind of, new to people. And also it was the emergence of the shared service center, right? So it was kind of a very uncomfortable time in finance, because if everything moved to a shared service center, what do finance people do?
Right.
And my goal was to build a business partnership finance team that's focused on business and driving FP&A, driving strategic decisions, et cetera, et cetera. The second part of it was I also decided that all of the systems were not rolled out greatly. So we need to, as a CFO, right, nobody likes wasted resources. So if we've spent all of this money on SAP, we're going to optimize the system. So I decided to reopen some of the rollouts that were done and change the processes. And then the third thing that I did was, so I changed systems, people, and processes. The third thing that I did was change the business processes as well, because I decided the business processes were very clunky. It made salespeople that need to sell become admin intensive people. And those were my processes that we could change, like, your T&E, your admin, your forecasting, your budgeting, your templates, all of the stuff that people hate that comes out of finance, right? So that was my goal: create efficiency in process so that we can free up the sales and marketing organizations to sell. It was change the system so we can optimize this massive investment in SAP, and then restructure the organization for strategy. And guess what? I decided to do all of that in the same year. So you can understand the storm that unpacked itself. I could cope, but I was busy. And I think my biggest lesson is I didn't handle the change management as effectively as I could have. So every one of those decisions were absolutely the right decisions, but all three of them at exactly the same time, I didn't realize the impact that I was going to create around me. In terms of business, in terms of, even though you're doing, I think that I'm helping a salesperson do less admin. I don't think that the salesperson has to learn a whole new system and a whole new process, which is uncomfortable for the person. So it doesn't mean that we all handle change in exactly the same way, even though it's the right change. So for me, that was my eye-opening moment. And when I sat back and I reflected on those 15 months and just the amount of change that I unleashed on an entire organization. I mean, at that stage, I was short-term pain for long-term gain. That was my theory. I could sit back and say that was my eye-opening moment. The lessons that I learned is that people need to change at their own pace. And you need to take the elephant and you need to bite it one chunk at a time. And if you take the whole elephant and eat it at exactly the same time, the amount of discord that unravels around you, is very up. It probably does more damage than it does good. So that has been my moment of truth. I'm glad to say it's been 12 years ago and I've moved on from it and I've learned significantly from it.
And that's the most important thing, right? Like I think change management is always an interesting one, especially when you look at the overall three components that you just described there from a people, process, technology perspective. There's just so many variables that go into that people element of it, right? And it's really where situational leadership comes into play, just in terms of tackling each individual that you're taking through change management to ensure that they're equipped and the transition is as effective and seamless as it can be. And so I love that you shared it that way. And I love that that was a learning for you as well, just in terms of how you improved and how you've been able to use that as an eye opener and effectively make calculated decisions and successful decisions as you move forward. I also think that if you went with Microsoft ERP versus SAP, it might have been better for change management. I'm kidding. What do you think, back to the leadership topic, right? What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions of leadership in your opinion?
So I think the biggest misconception of leadership is that all leaders should not show vulnerability, and leaders should not share failures. And I think that we bring that on ourselves because we want to reflect this very positive image, this person that's got it all together, that's driving this organization that has huge successes every day. And I think we don't share the journey that we either got there or the journey that we practice every day to stay there. I mean, nobody learns from somebody's success stories. People learn from the stories, from the rising phoenix, right? You need to share the stories of the phoenix. So, the time when you rose from the dust, and how you got yourself through that, how you mobilized an organization behind you, how you've built the self-awareness that you can actually talk about your truths. And I think it starts with self-awareness, owning your truths. And once you own it and you can speak about it, people are automatically inspired by you. And just being honest, there's so much of power in conversation. There's so much of power in honesty. Actually, it's even my biggest negotiation tool is that I walk in and say, here's my negotiables, here's my non-negotiables, share your negotiables and non-negotiables with me and let's talk. And because some people just enter strategic negotiation with what they want, and they try to play hardball, you kind of like, you're sitting hours later and you're still debating the 1 Rand 15 different directions. So it's rather, for me, it's put it all out there and let's see what comes of it. And let's be truthful in the conversation we're having. And let's just be honest about the intention of the conversation. So many times, up to now, I'll still open a conversation and say, can I be honest? Or, I don't understand. Please, can you explain to me? And, some leaders feel like you should have it all together and you should know it all, so you shouldn't ask for it. So me, it's just about, and it's also about showing that, vulnerability and empathy can drive results. It's actually your biggest levers to results is leading through people, and people will follow and people will be inspired and people will be motivated just if you show up authentically, because then they feel relieved that they don't need to do, that they can be their best selves, and that you create a safe space for that person to flourish. And it even goes into the conversations, right? So some of the hardest conversations I've had with people, is to sit down and say, I don't think you're going to be a director. I don't think you're going to be the next finance director. I don't think you're going to be the next CFO. And these are the reasons why I think that path is not for you. So let's unpack a path that is for you, because not all fish are gonna walk on land. It's exactly that. So let's talk about your strengths and where your strengths lead you to versus where you think you should be, and do you have the right skills to be there. And I think that honest conversation is what has always worked for me.
It's really exercising that authenticity, vulnerability, and honesty as well. But then also as a leader, being able to put yourself outside the comfort zone of being able to ask things that you don't know, like being able to say that you need to have something reiterated or clarified just for your understanding, right? And not pretend to know it all as well, because then that is not really effective and impactful at the same time. Sharon, much longer down the line from now, when the coil is burnt out on the journey, what is it that you want to be known for as a leader?
I think I want to be known for the heart, the smart, and the courage. I think I want to be known for, even if it's for somebody somewhere in the world to say she had an impact on me or she changed my life by this simple conversation, or it was her inspiration that got me to wake up the next day and try something different. So I really want to inspire people to be their best self. And there's so much of truth in that, right? Because it's be your best self. Don't be, don't be society's definition of what a best self looks like. Don't be your parents' definition of what a best self should be like, but just define for you from a very truthful and vulnerable perspective, what is your definition of your best self, and just go after it. And I think don't be afraid of failures. Failures are a part of life. The biggest lesson I've taught my son is that it's okay to fail. If he fails a test and his dad is all stressed, like he failed a test, I'm like, okay, it's good. It's really good that he failed, because one, you cannot protect somebody from failure. So I'd rather that become part of life than, you get into your teens or into adulthood, or your first big failure is like the end of your world, right? So I think the biggest lessons we can teach is failure is a good thing, because it makes you to stop, to pause, to think about what next, to what happened. And for me, it's that reflection every single day. I reflect twice a day. Absolutely. And it's just general things in the day, right? It's at the beginning of the day, it's who do I need to check in with? What's in the plan for the agenda this week? What does it look like? What do I have to sort out at home, et cetera, et cetera. In the afternoon, it's going to be, how did my day go? How were my meetings? How did I show up? That didn't go too well, or that went well, or I noticed that person, wasn't themselves today. So I need to check in with them, or it's that. And I think it's that constant reflection that helps us grow.
I have no doubt that you'll be known for that. I mean, I see the quality coming through the conversation and some of the personal stories that you've shared along the way, and also with the brief conversation we've had offline as well. I think it's an excellent place to leave it. Sharon, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really enjoyed the conversation with you. I'm glad we got to connect, and I'm glad that I listened to a little bit of your story. Thank you.